It's probably past time to start on the internet there, so hopefully everybody stayed with us a few minutes. We've moved some classes around and just making sure everybody gets where they're supposed to be and where they are. We're in Proverbs chapter 9 tonight. Proverbs chapter 9. If you want to be opening your Bible, turn in there. I've asked Brother Gene Staggs, if he will, to come and lead us in prayer as we begin this evening.
Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come here to serve another portion of our Holy Word. Father, we pray that everything we hear tonight will be overcome us with our word. May we always take our Holy Word, Father, put it in practice in our daily lives. Be with them, all those tonight, Father, that need our prayer, those that are sick and afflicted, those that have lost loved ones. Be with them, Father. Father, we pray always that thy word and thy love be done. As the teachers this night, as they teach your classes, and the resurrection of the things that they need to teach, perhaps someone might be turned into the faith. Lord, let us, Father, forgive us of anything that hold against us. Guide us to not pass away of the light. And Father, when we stand before thee, time is no more. Father, our prayer is to hear those words and to read thy faithful servant. In Christ's name.
Proverbs chapter 9. Proverbs chapter 9. We go back to the book of Proverbs to study about wisdom, to see the contrast. Chapter 9 has two women, if you will, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. If you have an outline there, you see that the first 6 verses deal with Lady Wisdom. As we looked at last week from chapter 8, wisdom is personified as a lady, and the behaviors and the characteristics and the personalities of wisdom and how wisdom conducts herself. And so the first 6 verses is kind of a continuation of that from chapter 8. Then you get into chapter verses 7 through 12. There's an interlude in this chapter here before you get to the contrast, although it has its own contrast within it, and it has to do with how to deal with a scoffer, with how to correct someone, with how to approach someone, and obviously the personality of that person and where they fit in this contrast of wisdom versus folly is going to determine the outcome or the approach, maybe even, of how to deal with someone when you need to give instruction or give correction or give criticism, and how that's going to look and what that's going to be like. And we'll spend some more time in that section because we've dealt a lot with the idea of wisdom. And then the last few verses go back to this, she's just called woman folly here. But it's the same woman that's in chapter 5, 6, and 7. It's that loose woman, it's that careless woman, it's that woman that is adulterous, that is not self-controlled or restrained. And so obviously there's a contrast to the first 6 verses versus the last 6 verses in this chapter. And so we began tonight with Lady Wisdom, if you will. Wisdom has built her house, verse 1 says. She has hewn her 7 pillars. What are wisdom's pillars. I may need Don Lee to help me with this discussion, but if I understand it correctly, the house sits on pillars. That is the support system. That is where the weight is bearing. And that's where the load sits. There will be a certain number of pillars based on the size of the house and the shape and to distribute the weight and to make sure that everything's evenly and proportionately. And again, I don't know anything about this, so I'm just telling you what little I've read to know about the pillars under a house. But it says here that wisdom has 7 pillars. Well, maybe there's 2 questions. Number 1, why 7? Number 2, what are the pillars? Okay? The number 7 is often used as the idea of completion. They would take Father, Son, Holy Spirit, north, south, east, and west. So you take all 4 directions and you take the 3 personalities of the Godhead, if you will, and you add that up and you get 7. A number of completeness, a number of perfection. Maybe if those directional ideas are the case, then something that goes in all directions. It reaches east, west, north, south. Why 7? What else might? I don't know. So if you're, I wasn't there when Solomon wrote this, so I'm not saying I got the answer. I think that's as good an answer as any, but there may be. I got some other suggestions. How about that? Anything else come to mind for you? Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. There was a craftsmanship involved here to these pillars, as there always is, right? The pillars are carefully built, constructed, in this case, probably cut out of rock, stone, which was, nowadays we lay block and pour concrete, and again, that's a process I know nothing about, but I know it happens. In this day and age, they would use stone, rocks, the whole idea of the chief cornerstone and all that in your Bible, and they would cut out, hew out places for the house to sit, to lay, to be secured. We take nice metal strippings now and nails and screws and all of that, but obviously there was a different process here, though the same principle. So definitely there's an element of her carefully crafting these 7 pillars. Mm-hmm. The number 7 is used quite often throughout the pages of Scripture. No doubt. 3, 7, and 10, probably your key numbers. Again, I know nothing about the arrangement of pillars necessarily, or how many. I don't know what's a good number. I don't know what's a big number. I know what a big number is, but I don't know. If you told me a house had 20 pillars, that wouldn't tell me nothing. If you told me a house had 5 pillars, well, all it would tell me is that it's smaller than the house with 20. That's all I would know. But as far as, I don't know if 7 pillars would be considered something large in this day and age. Maybe today it's not, but be careful. Back then it could have been quite a few. I don't know. I didn't do a lot of research on the construction of houses, But certainly I think Solomon chose 7 pillars for, a variety of reasons. I'm not sure what all he's trying to get at here. In my mind, I'm thinking that this number not only represents completeness, but it represents sufficiency. In other words, it is suitable for all who would come into the house of wisdom. Is that okay? If you would like to go into the house of wisdom, there's room for you in the house of wisdom. There's room for anybody that wants to go, everybody that wants to go. It's big enough to accommodate anyone who would be intrigued to enter. I don't know. Okay? Okay? Had some placed strategically, interior maybe, to provide added support or added strength. So wisdom is not just adequate, but it goes above and beyond maybe to increase security. With wisdom, you're safe. I've been on floors that I didn't know whether I was safe or not. The floor would bend and bow, and you're thinking, oh me, there's not enough support here. Well, maybe that's the reason for 7 pillars to put in their minds. Again, for me it says nothing because I don't know how many is necessary. But even if you know a little bit about house pillars, don't let it, don't let it. I think the emphasis is on some type of stability or strength or size. The availability of wisdom. I've read everything this week. I don't know if I knew this or not. If I did, I don't remember it. But in the Old Testament, there was a belief that there was only 5 planets. Well, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, okay, so when did we discover the other? Be careful, because you probably learned there was 9, as did I, but now there's only 8. So the number of planets is changing all the time, it seems. So they had 5. I'm wondering where the other 3 came in, and when did we discover those? But from what I'm reading, there were 5 planets, and then the sun and moon. So somebody suggested that there's your 7. Sun and moon, so the entire universe known at that time. 5 planets, sun and moon. How many days of creation? There's another 7 days of creation. Wisdom encompasses it all. You remember we mentioned this a lot last week about James 3. You remember me mentioning James 3? If you read James 3 verses 13 through 18, that's your section on heavenly wisdom versus earthly wisdom. And it says of wisdom from above, that we call heavenly wisdom, it starts out by saying it's first pure, then it's peaceable. And don't ask me, I didn't memorize all of them. I just memorized those 2. But guess how many there are listed in James 3 and verse 13? There's 7. So I don't know. I don't know. I just maybe we're trying to make a connection that that just so happens to be that James listed 7 things in James 3 and verse 13 that wisdom from above is. It's first pure, and then peaceable. It goes on to things like gentle and hospitable and not a hypocrite. There's 7 of them there. You can find them and write them down if you so choose. But I don't know. But obviously there's a reason why there's 7. And obviously it's an emphasis upon the pillars and the strength that they provide. Verse 2 begins with the feast. There's been a feast prepared. Been meat prepared. There's been wine prepared. The table's been set. Invitations have been sent out. Whoever, verse 4, is simple, let him come in. To him who lacks sense, wisdom cries out, "Come and eat of my bread and drink of my wine." Verse 6. Leave your simple ways and live, and walk in the way of insight. What is meant by simple ways? What do you think wisdom's after there? Okay. Forsake the foolish. That is a paraphrase, but that is the idea for sure. The simple ways. Some translations say simple ones, or the company of the simple ones. Maybe you're looking at something like that. What does that suggest to you? Or forsaking foolishness or foolish way. What does that mean? Okay? Leave them, right? Leave them. Forsake them. Turn away from them. The opposite, found in Proverbs 9 and verse 6, is what? What is the opposite of the way of the simple? Understanding. Who's got something else? Life. The way of life. The way of understanding. Who's got something else? At the end of verse 6. Insight. The way of insight. The way of understanding. The way of life. Leave the simple ways and turn to the way of life, the way of insight, the way of understanding, the way of guidance. Wisdom is inviting here, right? Wisdom is giving you an opportunity. Remember last week, for those of you that were here, we talked about how simple is used here, and I'd be very careful with this word, but the idea of simple here is ignorant, foolish, dumb, okay? I understand that we refer to people as, well, they're just a simple person. I had a guy, even today, we was talking about his father, who is no longer living, and he said, he was just a simple man. Well, that's a compliment, right? And he meant it that way, and I took it that way. We use that as a compliment. It's just a simple person, meaning didn't have to have all the flashy, latest, greatest, biggest, just very content, very simple in desire and in needs and in wants, and easy to get along with. And when he said he was a simple man, that's what I heard. That's the way I interpreted that, and I agreed with him. In the book of Proverbs, it means something different. And so it's not desirable. It's not a compliment in the book of Proverbs. It's the opposite. It is a criticism. Simple, meaning ignorant, lacking in understanding, lacking in insight, lacking in guidance, just, doing your own thing, ignorantly, maybe naive a little bit, maybe gullible, but obviously foolish and careless as to how one would live. So, the simple ways, the simple ones, leave them. Turn away from them. And so, first 6 verses, there they are, Lady Wisdom. We got most of her in chapter 8, and so not a whole lot here, just making the contrast to the end of the chapter. But before we get there, let's deal with 7 through 12. So we got a scoffer. We've got a mocker. We've got a arrogant braggart. How else you want to define scoffer? What other words would you use? Cocky. There's another good one. Cocky. How would you describe a scoffer? Not bright at all, not wise in any stretch of the imagination. It does. It does. Yes, sir. About the world and the state of the world and how people are going to be behaving. Yes. Disobedient. I don't remember what all was in 2 Timothy 3 there, but arrogance and haughty and disobedient, lovers of self. I guess that would be cocky. All evil-minded, lacking respect, lacking honor, would be all that in 2 Timothy 3 there, describing the world of Timothy's day. A scoffer. So explain to me verse 7. And why is it that way? You correct a scoffer, you get abused. You reprove a wicked man, you get injured. Why? Okay. There's no winning. For you or them, huh? Uh-huh. Okay. They're going to argue, defend, try to rationalize, justify. I don't know what all words you want to use. But because of all of these behaviors and personality traits that we just use to describe them, and accurately so, there's no win. There's no win for you or them. You try to correct them, and instead of good coming from it, it's almost like you're punished for trying to help them. And that makes it hard, doesn't it? I mean, I would say that if we're dealing with people the way Christians ought to deal with people, the goal is for there to be a win-win situation for both of us. Meaning, I help you, you help me. We both win. It's not about, it's not about me trying to win and you lose, or me hoping you win and I lose, or it's the desire, if it's a Christian desire, is that if I'm trying to correct something in your life, I'm doing it trying to grow myself while I'm trying to help you grow. And that's a win-win for both of us. But the problem is that when when the person to be corrected, see, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your attitude is. Hopefully your attitude is right. But even if your attitude is right, when you try to correct someone who refuses to be corrected, you see it's really a lose-lose for both of you. Sometimes you just keep your mouth shut because you know how it's going to work, right? We know people who refuse to be helped. And it makes it challenging for those of us who want to help each other. It makes it challenging to try to help. Because if I'm trying to help you and you're hurting me, it only makes human sense that before long I'm going to quit trying to help you because it's hurting me, right? And I'm not here to debate whether we should or we shouldn't, or when we should give up or when we should quit, or we'll have to determine. That's what wisdom does for us. Wisdom will try to help us determine when enough is enough, at least for now. Wisdom will help us determine who's going to behave like this, and wisdom will help us determine when the abuse and the injury has become so great that we, at least for the moment, cease the desire to try to correct. Because, verse 8, if you keep reproving the scoffer, if you keep correcting the scoffer, eventually they're gonna hate you. And all I'm simply going to point out here is that it should never be our desire to cause someone to hate us. If that's our motive or that's our intention, then we're wrong to start with in our effort to correct or to reprove, or that should never be. So what I'm trying to say is that hopefully wisdom's going to help us know when to stop so that we don't create at least as best we can. We can't stop anybody from hating us. But hopefully we will be wise enough to recognize that this ain't profitable before it gets to a point to where there is some hatred in there. But perhaps we've all experienced that as well. But the end of verse 8, to reprove a wise man, and he will love you. That's a pretty good contrast, isn't it? Love and hate. I understand those are extremes. I understand that contrast is painted there. Obviously, there's a contrast between the scoffer and the wise man. So verse 9, who does profit from instruction? Why? The wise do. Why? Okay, because there is an acceptance. What happens to people who accept instruction? They get wiser. That's the way that works, right? They gain. There's your win. They win. You win in that you're not abused or injured. They win in that they receive or accept the instruction. They become wiser. Do you know somebody who don't want to be taught anything? Just makes it very hard, doesn't it? I don't want to be that person. I just really don't want to be that person. I'd like to think that there's always something that I can learn. Now, I know how to be arrogant. I know how to be cocky. I know how to be boastful. I'd be lying if I said I'd never acted that way, because I have. And yet it's interesting how foolish those attitudes become. You ever stop and think about that? It almost seems like the moment when you get to the point that you know it all, can I use the word idiot? You're the biggest idiot around. Can I say that in Bible class? Maybe it's okay. I think you understand what I'm saying. It's like they know it all, so it does no good to try to. We all know people like that. Maybe we've been that person at times in our lives. Hopefully, we're not that person. Hopefully, we're the type of person that can profit from instruction. Because the scoffer can't. You're really wasting your time, aren't you? I hate to say it like that, but have you ever got to a point to where you said, you know what, I'm just wasting my time and effort? You know what that feels like, don't you? We all do. And it's a hard place to get to because we really want to help the person, but yet at that moment in their life, for whatever reason, they don't tend to want to be helped. I do think ego gets in the way a lot. You know, some of the hardest words in the English vocabulary, I was wrong, I am sorry. You know, those are tough words to. I mean, if they come out with meaning, those are tough words to say. And we can say them all day long and not have any meaning. But if we truly have the feeling behind them of I was wrong, or I'm sorry, I messed up. It, puts you in a position when you are able to genuinely receive instruction to be able to be blessed even greater. And that's what that's the contrast here, is that when you it'd be interesting to see how many synonyms for the word scoffer imply ego. Because, I mentioned arrogant, Shelley mentioned cocky, braggart, I mentioned, all of those are ego. How many of those words to describe a scoffer, a lover of self, thinking about 2 Timothy 3 there. When you're disobedient to parents, when you're dishonoring of parents, it's because you want to do what you want to do. That's what disobedience is all about. Disobedience is all about me serving myself. I don't want to do what you ask me to do because I want to do what I want to do. There you go, ego. Maybe all of them tie to ego. I don't know, but certainly a lot of them do. And yes, it gets in the way. It gets in the way for me. It gets in the way for a lot of people. It's hard to admit wrong. It's hard to receive instruction. But how blessed we are when we can and when we will and when we do. So the fear of the Lord, verse 10, there it is, Proverbs 1 and verse 7, right? The whole theme of the book of Proverbs, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One to be insight. Verse 11 gives a promise, doesn't it? How does verse 11 connect to verse 10? Okay? If you get the right help, it might help you to live longer, huh? Now there's exceptions to every proverb, okay? Just because you read, your days will be multiplied, years added to your life. You remember the first commandment with a promise? It was the fifth commandment, wasn't it? Honor your father and mother. Commandment number 5 in Exodus 20, that your days may be long upon the earth. First commandment with a promise. Honor your father and mother that you may have a long life. Well, again, there's exceptions to that, okay? But it is a promise when you follow the commandment, fear the Lord, gain knowledge of the Holy One. One of the blessings of that, length of days, reward for doing what's right, for receiving the instruction, for trying to grow by that. I think we all could learn from each other. And it might just add years to our lives if we would learn from each other. A person who is head over heels about themselves and could care nothing about anybody else may just have their life ended shorter because they refuse to learn from other people. Again, always exceptions, but that seems to be the promise. Verse 13, and I know we're out of time, but the woman of folly. Here she is again. We've covered her pretty extensively in pretty great detail. She's obviously the woman of folly here in contrast to the woman of wisdom in verse 1. And you could just list her ways there. She's loud, she's seductive, she's ignorant, she's looking for anybody, she's inviting everybody, she's wanting the simple, right? Because people who have understanding and insight are smart enough to stay away from her. So she wants the simple. She wants the ignorant. She wants those who refuse to act wisely. The end of her, well, we've covered that, hadn't we? Verse 18. Death sits at her door. You go that way. Sin always has punishment. Ultimately, death, spiritual death, right? So you live foolishly, and you'll reap what you sow. And that's a principle not just in the Proverbs, but in the whole Bible. It does come to no end. Lord willing, next week, Jeff will be covering Proverbs chapter 10.
Good evening to everyone. Certainly good to be here. I'm confident we all had good Bible classes this evening. So thankful that we have the opportunity to gather this evening. Look forward to every opportunity. Tonight on our sick list, Peggy Salmon is in the hospital with complications from the COVID virus. This is the niece of Shirley Brown. Nellie Urban, her surgery went well and she is home now recovering. And Brenda Gobble is showing signs of improvement and strength with each day. And also we need to keep in our prayers very seriously Chris Bowser's stepmom, Ricky, has had a stroke and very serious tonight, and the family's with her, and they expect to take her off life support in the morning. So please pray for that family. Our men's monthly Bible study will be this Saturday morning at 7:30 in the annex. Wade Slater will be leading our study that morning. And we'll continue in our study from Romans 8, verses 18 through 30. So if you can, men, be there, please. Camp Nayati is coming up at the end of the month. There are flyers in all the foyers for information in case you haven't been before or need some information. You can find it there. There are sign-up sheets. If you're going, please sign up as soon as you know and indicate if you're staying each night or not and how many of you there are. It helps me greatly in the planning and the things need to be done. And I hope you'll consider very much to go. Tonight, leading us in our devotional period, Wade Slater will lead us in our singing. Pat Mashburn will offer the lesson and invitation. Our closing prayer will be led by Cameron Ezel.
Before our devotional, we'll sing When the Roll is Called Up Yonder, number 852, all three verses. When the trumpet is 915.
I was told from an early time in my life there was two things you could expect. One of them was paying taxes, and the other one was dying. I don't know which is worse. But anyway, I submit to you there is something more than those two things that are permanent. One of them is time. If you don't believe it, see what time you get up in the morning. See what time you go to work in the morning. See what time you come to worship next Sunday morning. It's based on time. And the next one is change. If you don't believe it, look back at what's happened in the years that we have lived. I have a few things I wrote down that I can remember that change has happened with. One of them was early on, all the houses didn't have indoor plumbing. Some of it was outdoors, and they called it outhouse. There was no central heat and air in most houses. If there was heat, there was a wood stove. There was no auto air conditioning. Cars didn't have any air conditioning. Farming was the biggest part of our economy. Jimmy told me that he grew up plowing a mule. Then he ended up driving an air conditioning tractor. What a change. I'm glad he can do that. America put a man on the moon in the 60s, and they came back. I had people that I worked around that never believed that anybody went to the moon. It was all a big hoax. But it happened. We picked cotton, for those of us that can remember, one bow at a time. And we got paid by weight. And it took a lot to get 100 pounds of cotton, one bow at a time. We pulled corn one ear at a time. When we got a wagon load, we carried it to market. As a teenager, I remember graduating into the age that I could go to work down for the Blues on the Blue Farm. And he paid us $5 an hour. Can you believe that? $5. I thought I was rich. I really did. If I worked a whole week, I made $25. You know what you could do with $25 then? A lot more than now. One of the first jobs that I ever had, I guess was full-time, I made a whopping $2.35 an hour. I bought a car when I got out of high school. Daddy took us up to Chuck Brewer Chevrolet, said, pick out what you want. And I did. I picked out a 68 Chevelle Super Sport. He said, now go in there and sign the papers to where you can pay for it. I wasn't expecting that. But I did. It cost me $3,000 to get that car. And it didn't have air conditioning either. Gasoline at that point in time cost me 20 cents a gallon, and that car lacked a lot of gas, I can tell you. It cost 20 cents a gallon, so I could fill up for little to nothing. So it seemed like it wasn't that bad. That was in the 60s that gas cost that. And that was some of the changes that has happened. And there's a whole lot more we could talk about. Today, most houses have indoor plumbing. You don't see many that don't. Most houses have air conditioning. You can't buy a car any longer for $3,000. Can't buy much of nothing for $3,000, for that matter. Wages have increased drastically. Maybe you're making more than $15 an hour. I don't know. Everything else has increased. Gasoline today, this day, is a lot more than it was this time a year ago. Change is everywhere. Time is everywhere. Everything depends on time, and change is inevitably going to be in there. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, he talks about time. It says, there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, and a time to tear and a time to mend. a time to be silent, and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. We've seen a lot of change. We've been in a lot of different times. One thing that does not change is God's love for each of us. His love was so great that he sent the only Son he had to be crucified on the cross that we could be forgiven of the sins that we bear. Tonight, if you have sins that you're bearing that you haven't been forgiven of, or you haven't been baptized into Christ's name, then at this time we'll give you opportunity to do that. So if change is on your mind, please make that change.
When we walk with the Lord and fly of His word, what glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Our shadow can rise, our cloud in the skies, but its mouth quickly drives it away. Not a doubt nor a fear, not a sigh or a tear, and abide while we trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. In fellowship sweet, we will sit at His feet, or we'll walk by His side in the way. What He says we will do, where He sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey.
We'll close with 346 in your songbook, the first verse, and then we'll have our closing prayer. He lives, number 346.
I serve the risen Savior in the world today. I know that He is living, whatever men may say. I see His hand of mercy, I hear His voice of cheer, and just the time I need Him, He's always here. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along the narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within my heart.
Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this day and thank you for everything that you have blessed us with. Dear Lord, thank you for Pat and the lesson that he brought to us tonight, and to please let us all gain something from it and to use it in our everyday lives. Thank you for Rodney and Chastity and Joshua and Morgan and everything they do for your church here at Leoma. Thank you for all the elders and all the deacons and their families. Dear Lord, please be with all the cancer patients and all the COVID patients, and to let the doctors find a cure for those diseases one day. Thank you for our soldiers that are fighting for our freedom, and to let them come home safely. Dear Lord, please be with those that could not make it or chose not to make it tonight, and to just bless them. Dear Lord, please be with anyone in here that is going through something and to put your loving arms around them. Dear Lord, as we depart, we ask for safe travels and for us to come back here at the next appointed time. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.